Hi, I'm Matt from Freshtone. Me and my writing partner Mike have been working together in composing pro audio and samples for about 25 years now. The idea for Freshtone and the Lost Tapes releases came from a seed of an idea I had going back over a decade. I was getting tired of recycling the same old drums over and over, the retro loops. There's just not enough of them, everyone's doing it, and there's only so many times you can just recycle the same old loops. So I thought it would be cool to have some new loops to do that with, but I knew from people that had tried to do it before that you couldn't really do that using modern recording techniques. So we decided if we were going to do it, we'd have to do it using machines, equipment, and instruments from that era, recorded how they would have been recorded during that era. There was no other way to get that authenticity.
Hello, I'm Mike Wilkie, the other bit of Freshtone with Matthew Corbett. Matt's told you many of the technical details of how we put this together, but on a more generic sort of basis, I guess when we started Freshtone back in 2010, 2011, we asked ourselves a very fundamental question, and that was how far do you have to go to fully authenticate something like this? Because let's face this, if you use Logic, if you use Pro Tools, there's always a plugin, isn't there? There's a Studio plugin, there's an SSL plugin, there's a Neve plugin, there's everything has been recreated using that moniker of this is as good as the original. So why can't you just plug in a Strat, plug in a Fender Jazz, off you go, trigger it in Logic, there we are, authentic 60s, 70s soul, funk and fusion loops. Well, we concluded that however people say that, you actually can't authenticate it without properly going into that scenario, into a studio like Torag, and using those instruments in that situation and recording it, at least recording the right proportion of it, exactly as they would have done at the time. Which means that you need the desk, you need the 2-inch machine, you need the old compressors, and importantly you need the old instruments. Beyond putting basic tracks down, it is possible to embellish with more modern instrumentation, but the heart of it must be recorded in the scenario in which people did it in the first place.
Mike then took this idea and suggested that we roll it out into full-on construction kits, which I thought was a great idea because we could apply those same recording techniques to instruments and percussion and other bits, so you have a more rounded package, so it wasn't just about the drums. We found a studio in East London called Torag that had a fully analogue setup. It had the old Decca desk from the 60s and Studio tape machines, lots of old compressors, lots of old outboard kit. Amazing space, but it was expensive and it was a minimum booking of 3 days. So with this we thought we would do the maximum amount of pre-production so that when we got into the studio it would just be full speed ahead and we wouldn't be wasting any time. What we did was we wrote and recorded 40 tracks essentially, 8 bars a piece, so you have an A and a B part to each track to give it some variation. Then we recorded these over the space of about 4 or 5 weeks. Then down to a stereo stream, we took it into the studio on the first day, and the stereo stream was printed straight onto one tape. First thing that happened was our drummer came in and he began to work through each of these 40 tracks, one after the other. He would listen, then record, have a pause, listen to the next one, and so on and so on. Then we moved to bass, guitars, percussion, keyboards and organs. By the time we were done, we had a full tape of music essentially on 8 tracks of 2-inch tape. our engineer Ed then took these and streamed them off separately into digital files and sent them back over to us in our studio, where we started to engineer them. We decided we wanted to time everything perfectly so it could just be dropped straight into people's projects. They wouldn't have to sit there and mess around and fix any sloppy playing or any mistimed drums, things like that. Unfortunately, at the time, the only way to do this was to do it manually, so every single hi-hat, every guitar note, every bass note was corrected by hand and by sight using Logic Time and Pitch Machine. Now, this took weeks and weeks and weeks and was a fairly soul-destroying process, but it was one that was necessary if we were going to deliver a quality product. In subsequent years, this technology has got a lot better. FlexTime now is getting to a stage where it's nearly artifact-free. It's not artifact-free, but it's getting there. So these days we can just load files, we can time and quantize them, and then just listen through for any inaccurate flexing or any artifacts. So this has cut down our production process quite a lot. So when you add up about 5 weeks of pre-production, about 4 or 5 days recording, and then probably about another 2 months post-production, maybe 6 weeks these days. It's quite a long process to get a product finished. And then inevitably, because we're human, there's always mistakes, so we have to send it out to our beta testing team, who then go through and tell us what we've missed. Occasionally something will be, a file won't be rendered out, or it won't be rendered out properly. So that's a really invaluable part of the process, that we make sure that by the time we come to get the product out, it's as perfect as we can get it.
Now, specific instruments that we've used along the way. This is a 335, it's a standard 335. It's not particularly ancient, but the electronics are exactly the same as they would have been way back. So this lovely 335 has been a pivotal instrument, let's put it that way, in Lost Tapes, giving that raspy, funky kind of sound, and also giving that slightly melancholic jazz sound that you can get. Much more so than anything like a Les Paul or a Strat. It exudes retro love, if you want me to put it that way. So we've used this one a lot from the start through to now. Although in Toe Rag we also used an original Dan Electro guitar, which you'll see a picture of in a minute. We used an old Baldwin, and on Lost Tapes 1 specifically we used a Hofner bass virtually the whole way through it. And there's a story for you. An old friend of ours, Alan, came in to see us one day and he said, I've got an old bass guitar in my loft. He said, I was going to give it away. Shall I bring it in to show you? And so we said, yeah, go ahead, I'll bring it in. When he brought it in, it was number 326, I think, was the prefix. It was an original Hofner, early 60s bass, and we almost fell over. And it's a beautiful thing, and we used it all the way through Lost Tapes 1 and through some of Lost Tapes 2. The only thing we will say about retro instruments is that when you're meeting modern technology in terms of loops, when they're acidized, when they're turned into WAVs, and when you've edited them down, they've got to be usable as a bass part. So we did find on Lost Tapes 1 that bass parts, which were mainly the Hofner, were great for embellishments, but for pure bass parts in a modern idiom, in the way that modern producers would use Lost Tapes, we found that that wasn't quite right. Now, strangely, and this is kind of contrary to some of the stuff I've been talking about, we have here a hand-built Sandberg German bass. Now, what I did with this, and this is almost exclusive through Lost Tapes 3, is that I put old round wound strings on it, used round wound strings as well, by the way, turned everything down tone wise, and what I did on that end and on this end I put a little bit of blue tack. So what I got was almost some Stax Motown type of bass sound, which we used a lot during Lost Tapes 3, and in this instance something modern, given a rather eccentric treatment, grant you, gave us a retro sound which could also be used as a proper bass part, not just as embellishment. So that, we believe, was an improvement to Lost Tapes 3. But generally on the keyboards we've used a Hammond B3, we've used various Hammonds, we've used original Wurlitzers, we've used old Fender Rhodes, and when Emre's been doing the drums he's been miking up with old wooden mics, and everything has been of the era.
Ed Deegan's been our engineer since the get-go with Freshtone. He recorded with us at Toe Rag, and he has his own studio called Gizzard in East London. He uses Studer A80 tape machines, and he's got a retro one-off Alice console, which is from Manor Studios, the original Virgin Records recording studios from the 70s. Add to this a whole host of very vintage outboard gear, compressors, signal processors, just an amazing amount of stuff. And it's his studio, so he knows how to get the very best out of all of that, and he knew exactly what we were looking for after our first two releases. So it's just been a seamless process every time we've worked with him.
We used a selection of old amps in Toe Rag and in Gizzard, and I'll show you a picture of some of those from those sessions in due course. But I think the creme de la creme of amplification is a rather eccentric little beast that Matthew Corbett found in a classified ad, and it's this. Here it is. It's completely unbranded, and he found it, as I said, in a classified ad, and it's an old 25 watt valve amp made by a guy who used to work in the Watkins factory in the 60s. It's very old now, and it's been wonderful throughout the course of Lost Tapes 2 and Lost Tapes 3. Absolutely wonderful, brilliant retro sound. So you don't necessarily have to have the branded goods. You can still find bits of 60s paraphernalia out there which will give you an extraordinary result. And this, as you see here, unbranded 25 watt valve amp, probably circa 67, 68. And it's adorable, it really is.